Run right now, while there's still a chance to save yourself. You have 30 seconds.
David Simmons froze, holding a crystal glass filled with the finest Dom Perignon, vintage 1996. Every drop of that champagne was worth a fortune. The bottle had cost him $3,000, and he knew exactly what every sip was worth. The young waitress, a woman of about 25 with dark hair pulled into a neat bun, leaned toward his ear under the pretense of confirming his dessert order or offering to refill his wine. Her words came as a faint, broken whisper that cut through the low hum of conversation inside the Golden Swan, the most luxurious restaurant in Miami. Her voice trembled with pure, unfiltered terror, not performed, not theatrical, but the kind of primal fear that even the best actors could never fake. The girl's hands were shaking so violently that her notepad almost slipped from her chalk-white fingers. Her face looked ghostly pale, as if she had just seen a specter, or something far worse. Beads of cold sweat appeared on her forehead despite the cool air-conditioned dining room. And in her eyes, David saw pure panic, the unmistakable panic of someone who knows something horrifying and is risking absolutely everything to warn a total stranger. Sitting across from him, his fiancée Kelly Graves didn't hear a word of that desperate whisper. She was too absorbed in an animated conversation with her mother, Marilyn, discussing the details of the grand wedding they had been planning for months. Kelly's father, Oliver Graves, an influential banker, was at that moment telling an amusing anecdote about his business partners, and everyone at the table was politely laughing. But David heard every word the waitress said. Every syllable was seared into his mind, scorching away all thoughts of his perfect evening. Before we go on, tell us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. He slowly, very slowly turned his head, afraid to disturb the fragile moment, and met the waitress's eyes for a fraction of a second. That brief flash of eye contact was enough to understand the most important thing: she wasn't joking. This wasn't a prank, not some delusion, not an attempt to draw attention. The girl gave a barely noticeable nod toward the service exit behind the kitchen and immediately stepped back, blending in among the other waiters in crisp white shirts and elegant black vests. She vanished so quickly, so seamlessly, that her presence felt almost like an illusion, a fleeting vision. David's heart began to pound faster, harder, as if trying to escape his chest, though outwardly he remained composed. 34 years of life, 10 of them spent in the merciless world of finance, investments, and high-stakes deals, had taught him to control his emotions even in the most critical, stressful situations. His face stayed calm, his breathing even, but beneath his expensive handmade Italian suit, tailored in one of Milan's best ateliers, an icy shiver ran down his spine. At that very moment, inside the pocket of his immaculate jacket rested a diamond ring, an exquisite 4-carat stone he had spent 3 long weeks choosing in Miami's most prestigious jewelry boutique. The ring was meant for the main event of the evening, his proposal to Kelly. Its cost equaled that of a luxury apartment in the city center, but to David, it wasn't about money. It was a symbol of commitment, of seriousness, of the future he was ready to offer. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail, like a major business transaction. In just about 10 minutes, he was going to call the waiter, order a special dessert, deliver a carefully rehearsed speech about love and their future, and then, with practiced elegance, kneel on one knee before a stunned Kelly and her thrilled parents. A hidden videographer was ready to capture every second of that perfect moment. Kelly, he was certain, would cry tears of happiness. Her parents, Oliver and Marilyn Graves, would clap in delight. His life would, once and for all, become completely and irreversibly perfect. The final brushstroke on his portrait of success. David Simmons was 34 years old, and by that age, he'd built a financial empire, his own investment bank and a tech company specializing in crypto startups. Experts estimated his personal fortune at $380 million, a figure that would make most people dizzy. He lived in a luxurious penthouse in Brickell, Miami's most prestigious district, with panoramic views of Bayfront Park. In his garage sat a black Porsche, the latest model. On his wrist glimmered a Swiss watch worth $50,000. The dream of any woman. The living embodiment of success. And of all the women in the city, he had chosen Kelly Graves. Kelly was the ideal partner in every way, stunningly beautiful, with long dark hair and emerald eyes, educated in London, from a wealthy and respected family, and gifted with flawless manners and social grace. She spoke 4 languages, understood art and fashion, and was always a welcome guest at Miami's most exclusive events. They had been together for 2 years, and this evening at the Golden Swan was meant to be the culmination of their love story. For this special night, David had chosen not just a good restaurant, he had chosen a legend. The Golden Swan was considered the most expensive and prestigious establishment in all of Miami, the place where CEOs, politicians, and world-famous celebrities dined. He had reserved a private room with a panoramic view of the glowing city skyline, ordered that legendary Dom Perignon vintage 1996 for $3,000, and tucked the diamond ring, shining with flawless clarity, into his inner pocket. Kelly's parents, Oliver and Marilyn Graves, matched exactly the image David had expected. Oliver, 58, with distinguished gray hair at his temples, had been running a major investment bank for more than 20 years. His name opened every door in Florida's financial circles. A single handshake from him could seal million-dollar partnerships. On his wrist gleamed a timeless Patek Philippe, the ultimate symbol of old money and impeccable taste. Marilyn Graves, an elegant 49-year-old woman, headed one of the largest charitable foundations in the country and served on the cultural board of several prestigious institutions. Her outfits were always flawless, her manners refined, her smile perfectly rehearsed. She and her husband were true representatives of old money, the kind of elite that, however discreetly, always looked down on new money, those who had earned their fortunes rather than inherited them. Yet, to David's surprise, they had accepted him, a young entrepreneur with no aristocratic roots, raised not in a mansion but in a modest apartment. They accepted him because he was incredibly successful and wealthy. They accepted him because their beloved daughter, Kelly, truly loved him and glowed with happiness when she was near him. And, not least, they accepted him because they secretly hoped to blend his new money with their long-standing prestige and connections, creating an even more powerful family empire. Dinner went perfectly, like a carefully composed symphony, exquisite appetizers prepared by a Michelin-starred chef, magnificent French wine from rare collections, and light conversation about their latest travels to exotic places, about promising investments in emerging markets, about the upcoming ballet season at the Adrian Arsht Center for the Performing Arts. David could feel the ring in his pocket growing heavier with each passing minute, as if reminding him of his mission for the evening. In 10 minutes, maybe less, he would put his carefully crafted plan into action. Everything had been thought through down to the smallest detail and rehearsed in his mind dozens of times. He would subtly signal the waiter, ask for the special dessert he had ordered in advance, say a few heartfelt words about love and how Kelly had changed his life, then gracefully lower himself to one knee and open the velvet box. Kelly, he was certain, would shed happy tears. Her parents would applaud warmly. And his life would finally fall perfectly into place, the ultimate picture of success he had spent years building. The perfect fiancé, the influential family, the limitless future. The final brushstroke on the portrait of a winner. But suddenly, something went catastrophically wrong, all his plans shattered in a single whisper. That same young waitress, the woman of about 25 with a tired but pleasant face, approached their table to refill their glasses. David caught a glimpse of her expression and instantly noticed how nervous she was. Her hands shook so much that the bottle in her grip trembled slightly. Tiny drops of sweat glistened on her forehead despite the cool air, and her brown eyes kept darting toward the restaurant's main entrance, as if she were waiting for someone terrifying to appear. When she leaned closer, pretending to pour the expensive wine into his glass, she whispered so quietly he barely heard it, but her tone carried desperate urgency. "Leave now. Immediately." For a moment, David thought he had imagined it, a trick of his mind, or perhaps random sounds mistaken for words. But she continued, her lips barely moving, her gaze still fixed on the glass. "There are armed men in the building. You have 30 seconds, maybe less. Run." David felt the blood drain from his face. A joke? A prank? Maybe the girl was unstable or under the influence of something? But when he looked up and met her eyes, he saw no madness there, only pure, unfiltered terror. The kind of fear for another person's life that could never be faked. Instinctively, his eyes swept around the room. Kelly was laughing lightheartedly at one of her father Oliver's witty jokes. Marilyn was elegantly scrolling through her expensive smartphone, checking her messages. Everything around them looked perfectly normal, calm, and safe. Crystal chandeliers bathed the hall in warm light, classical music played softly, and other guests were peacefully enjoying their dinners. Then something caught David's eye, something wrong. Through the massive panoramic window that opened into the Golden Swan's lobby, he saw a sight that made his stomach drop and chills race down his spine. 3 large men in black suits were entering the building. They moved in sync, like a well-trained tactical team. Even under their button jackets, he could clearly make out the shapes of concealed weapons, likely pistols in shoulder holsters. Their eyes swept across the restaurant methodically, scanning every table. They were searching for someone. Someone specific. Him. At that instant, David realized the truth. That unknown waitress had just saved his life with her reckless warning. But how could she have known about the attack? Why would she risk everything to warn a stranger? And most importantly, who were those men, and what did they want? To kidnap him for ransom? Or was their plan far darker? His heart was pounding so loudly he was sure everyone around could hear it. Adrenaline surged through his body like a wave. He had to make a decision right now, before those 3 came closer. Stay put and pretend nothing was happening? Or trust the waitress and act? Every second was worth its weight in gold. Every hesitation could cost him his life. David forced himself to take control of his panic, recalling those high-stakes negotiations where he had learned to keep a straight face under pressure. He rose from his seat slowly, masking his tension with a casual smile, and addressed Kelly and her parents in a calm, almost apologetic tone. "Excuse me, I need to step away for a moment. I think I may have overdone it with those oysters." Kelly nodded without breaking her conversation about wedding dresses. Oliver smiled politely and turned another page of the dessert menu. No one suspected a thing. As David walked at an even pace toward the restrooms, doing everything he could not to reveal the tension inside him, he passed the same waitress. She was standing by a service table, pretending to arrange napkins. When he came level with her, she whispered so softly he could barely make out the words, without lifting her eyes. "The back exit is behind the kitchen. Go there right now. They're already here, you're almost out of time." David didn't even nod in response, careful not to draw any attention. He didn't head to the restroom, as he had said. Instead, he suddenly turned and decisively walked straight through the kitchen of the restaurant, ignoring the startled shouts of the chefs in their spotless white hats and aprons, who had certainly not expected to see a guest storming into their territory. "Hey, you can't go in there," someone shouted after him, but David didn't stop. He quickly found a heavy metal door marked "Staff Only," pulled it open with a sharp motion, and rushed outside. The warm Miami night air hit his flushed face like a slap, instantly sobering him. He found himself in a narrow, dark alley that smelled of garbage bins and damp asphalt, the complete opposite of the luxury he had just left behind. But right now, it was the road to salvation. David ran away from the perfect dinner with his beloved fiancée Kelly, away from her powerful parents, away from the precious ring in his pocket and the proposal that was supposed to define his life. Above all, he was running from 3 armed men whose intentions clearly promised nothing good. He didn't know exactly what they wanted: to kidnap him for ransom? To kill him, eliminating an inconvenient competitor? To injure him as a warning? The only thing he knew for sure was that this unknown waitress had just done something incredible, risking her job, and maybe even her life, to warn him. And he had to find out why. To understand. Behind him, shouts suddenly echoed. He heard doors flying open and the hurried footsteps pounding behind him. They had noticed him. The chase had begun. David dashed forward into the dark alley, his expensive handmade Italian shoes, worth $2,000, clapping loudly against the wet pavement. He rounded the corner of an old building, crossed a busy street, nearly getting hit by a car whose driver blared the horn in fury, and darted into a maze of narrow backstreets in the city's historic center. The Miami he knew by heart, the city he had driven across in his sleek Porsche, where he had felt like the master of life itself, had suddenly turned into a terrifying labyrinth of shadows and dangers. The city that had always belonged to him was now hostile. Then, all at once, a deafening gunshot cracked, a bullet slammed into the brick wall just inches from his head. Shards of brick sprayed across his face, cutting his cheek and drawing blood. They were shooting. Shooting at him. In the middle of Miami. On the crowded streets of the city. Who were these madmen who feared nothing? His lungs were burning from the desperate sprint. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest, but the raw fear of death drove him forward. David kept running until he saw a tiny light of salvation ahead, a small 24-hour coffee shop with a glowing sign and glass door. He burst into the cafe like a hurricane, rushing past stunned customers sitting at tables with their cups of coffee, not reacting to the angry shouts of a tattooed barista behind the counter, and ran straight through to the back of the shop. He pushed through the service door, thankfully, it was unlocked, and sprinted out the back exit. On the opposite side of the street, he saw his chance, an Uber with a green logo on the windshield, the driver just finishing dropping off a passenger. David ran to the car, yanked open the back door, and practically fell onto the seat, gasping from exhaustion and the adrenaline flooding his veins. "Drive anywhere, just go. Hurry, step on it," he shouted, his voice cracking from fear and strain. The driver, a man in his mid-40s with a weary face, glanced in the rearview mirror, saw the cut on David's cheek, the blood on his expensive suit, and the wild terror in his eyes, and realized immediately that it was better not to ask questions. He pressed his foot down on the gas pedal, and the car shot forward, merging into the flow of night traffic. David kept glancing through the rear window, peering into the darkness of the streets, expecting to see the pursuit. But there was nothing. It seemed he had escaped, at least for now. Then suddenly, his phone rang, breaking the tense silence of the car with its sharp, urgent tone. On the screen appeared the name, Kelly. He froze, staring at the vibrating phone. His hand moved toward the answer button but stopped halfway. What could he possibly say to her? How could he explain that he had just fled from a restaurant because a waitress had whispered a warning? The call ended. A few seconds later, it rang again. Then a third time. Then messages began arriving one after another, his phone vibrating without pause. "Where are you? What happened? David, answer me right now. My parents are in total panic. They called restaurant security. What's going on?" He had no idea what to reply. Everything that had happened felt so absurd, so unreal, that even he barely believed it himself. How could he explain that an unknown waitress had warned him? It sounded like complete insanity. But he had seen those three men with guns. He had heard the gunshot aimed at him. He had felt the sting of brick fragments on his cheek. The blood on his face confirmed it was all real. He was already caught up in some dangerous game whose rules he didn't understand. David almost told the driver to take him home, to the safety of his penthouse in Brickell, but stopped himself in time. Cold logic cut through the panic. If those men knew where he was having dinner tonight, if they had pinpointed his location so accurately, then they could just as easily know his home address. The penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, suddenly felt not like a fortress, but a trap. A hotel? Too risky and predictable, he could be traced through the reservation records. Friends? He couldn't endanger anyone by involving them in this nightmare. His house in Key West? Too far away, several hours' drive, and no guarantee he would make it there alive. David had just opened his mouth to tell the driver to take him to the train station, somewhere he could catch a ride out of the city and disappear, when his phone rang again. This time, an unknown number appeared on the screen, just a string of digits, not saved in his contacts. His fingers froze above the display. Was it them? The pursuers? Something made him answer, maybe sheer desperation, maybe the faint hope of finding some explanation for the madness unfolding around him. "Hello?" His voice came out hoarse, tight with tension. A woman's voice answered. Young, tired, and familiar. It was the waitress from the restaurant. "You're alive? Did you get away from them?" she asked anxiously, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine relief. David exploded. The mix of fear, anger, and confusion inside him finally erupted. "Who the hell are you? How did you get my private number? What the hell is going on? Who are these people? Why did they want to kill me? Answer me right now." She spoke with a surprising calm, as if she'd expected this reaction and was prepared for it. There was no panic in her tone, only weary determination. "I understand your anger and your fear. But I can't explain everything over the phone, it's too dangerous. They could be listening. We need to meet in person, face to face. I know a safe place where no one will find us." She quickly dictated an address, somewhere on the very edge of Miami, in a neighborhood David had never even heard of during all his years in the city. A working-class district, the kind of place successful businessmen never set foot in. Come alone. Completely alone, she insisted firmly. Don't tell anyone where you're going. And most importantly, under no circumstances go home or anywhere you usually appear. They'll be waiting for you there. This is about your life. David gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Distrust and desperation battled inside him. Why should I trust you? He said through clenched teeth. How do I know this isn't a trap? How do I know you're not one of them? There was silence for a few seconds, then she answered, her voice filled with quiet sadness, a kind of sorrow that couldn't be faked. You shouldn't trust me. You have no reason to. But if you want to stay alive, if you want to understand why someone wants you dead badly enough to shoot you in the middle of the city, then you don't have another choice. Decide quickly. With that, she hung up, cutting the call. David sat there with the phone in his hand, staring into the darkness beyond the window. The driver kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, patiently waiting for instructions on where to go next. There was curiosity in his eyes, but he was wise enough not to ask questions. Every instinct, every nerve in David's body screamed that this was a trap, a textbook setup, a perfect lure. But that same instinct had told him to believe the waitress's warning earlier and to run, and she had been right. If he had stayed and ignored her words, he would probably be lying dead on the polished marble floor of the Golden Swan right now, surrounded by shattered glass and blood. She had already saved his life once. Maybe, just maybe, he should trust her again. After a long internal battle, David took a deep breath and gave the driver the address the mysterious woman had recited. As the Uber crept through the late-night traffic toward the city's outskirts, David kept his eyes fixed on the window. Miami blurred past, the city where he'd built his financial empire from scratch, starting Simmons Capital with just $5,000 and turning it into $380 million. The city where, just hours earlier, he had planned to propose to the woman of his dreams, the city that was supposed to mark the beginning of the perfect new chapter of his flawless life. And now he was racing through those same familiar streets like a hunted criminal, running from armed men whose names he didn't even know, and placing his faith, desperately, in a waitress whose motives were a complete mystery. Life can turn upside down in a matter of minutes. An hour ago, he had everything. Now, he didn't even know if he'd live to see the morning. The address she had given led him to a shabby, time-worn apartment building in one of Miami's working-class districts. The gray, peeling walls, rusted balconies, and crumbling steps stood in stark contrast to the luxury he was used to. There wasn't a single Porsche in sight, not one person in a tailored suit worth thousands of dollars. David paid the driver, handing over far more than the fare. His hands were trembling too badly to check the amount. He climbed the creaking stairs to the third floor, where plaster crumbled from the walls and the air smelled of mildew and cats. He found the door covered in worn leatherette and knocked, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. The woman opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been standing there, waiting. She quickly scanned the dim hallway in both directions, making sure he was alone and not being followed, then motioned for him to come in, locking the door behind them with every bolt. The apartment was tiny, almost ascetic, a one-room space with the bare minimum of furniture and no trace of luxury or even comfort. A small couch, a scratch table, a few chairs, a little kitchen visible through the open doorway. Nothing at all like the gleaming world David had lived in for years. Here, people counted every dollar until payday. She offered him coffee, clearly trying to create at least some semblance of hospitality. He refused sharply, almost rudely. His fear and impatience made his voice harder than he intended. I don't want coffee. I want answers. Now. Who are you really? How did you know about those armed men? Why did you risk your life to warn me, a complete stranger? And most of all, who wanted me dead, and why? The woman let out a heavy sigh, walked slowly into the room, and sat down on an old wooden chair, her hands clasped tightly on her knees. Her face held a mixture of sorrow, exhaustion, and resolve. She took a few seconds to gather her thoughts, then lifted her eyes and began to speak. My name is Laura Adams, she said quietly but clearly. I've been working as a waitress at the Golden Swan for the past 3 months. Before that, I was an accountant at an investment company, a fairly successful firm. The same one you, David Simmons, bought exactly 2 years ago, and shut down within 6 months, piece by piece. David frowned, straining his memory, trying to recall that deal among the dozens he'd made. There had been so many acquisitions and takeovers in his career, he barely remembered their names, only the numbers of profits and losses. Laura continued, her voice growing firmer. I had a brother. His name was Michael Adams. He held a senior position at that company. He was the head of the finance department and had worked there for more than 15 years. When you acquired the firm and began your so-called optimization, you ruthlessly laid off half the employees to boost profits. My brother Michael was among the first to go. She spoke slowly, articulating each word as if she wanted him to feel every single one of them. He was 42 years old. He had a wife he adored, 2 college-age kids with dreams for their future, and a mortgage he had faithfully paid for years. He gave that company 15 of the best years of his life, and they threw him out like a piece of trash. He couldn't find another job in his field, too old, too much competition, too few chances. The money ran out fast. And soon, he couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments. Laura's voice began to tremble, her eyes filling with tears, but she kept going. 6 months after being fired, when the debts became unbearable, when his wife filed for divorce and took the kids, when the bank seized the apartment, my brother Michael ended his life. He left only a short note, I'm sorry. I can't take it anymore. I'm a failure. The words hit David like a physical blow. His lungs felt frozen, but he showed no outward sign. Years of hard negotiations had taught him how to hide emotion. His face remained composed, though something inside him twisted painfully. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly, his voice restrained. But what does this have to do with tonight? Why did they want to kill me? Laura wiped her tears. Everything. My brother wasn't the only one. 10 other people you fired were left with nothing. They lost their families, their homes, their lives. And some of them decided you should pay. Her tone hardened. The men at the restaurant, they're relatives of one of the fired employees, Victor Sullivan. He drank himself to death after the layoff, leaving behind 3 kids. I recognized them. I saw them at his funeral, at the meetings where they talked about revenge. David listened silently. A strange heaviness grew in his chest. At first, Laura confessed softly, I was with them. I hated you with everything I had. I got a job at the Golden Swan on purpose because I knew you went there often. I wanted revenge. I wanted you to suffer like Michael did. David tensed. So this was a trap? Laura shook her head. No. Not anymore. Tonight, I saw you differently. I saw the way you looked at Kelly, with love. The way you held her hand. The way you were nervous around her parents. For the first time, I saw not a monster, but a man. A man ruthless in business, yes, but still a man capable of loving, of wanting a family. Someone who maybe just didn't think about the consequences of his decisions. To you, it was all numbers, not people. She walked to the window, her voice quiet but steady. When I saw those men with guns, ready to kill you in front of your fiancée and innocent people, I couldn't let it happen. My brother Michael was a kind man. He taught me to forgive, to be better. He wouldn't have wanted that kind of revenge. He wouldn't have wished death on anyone, not even you. That's why I warned you, even though it meant betraying the others who had suffered. Silence filled the room. David stood motionless, something inside him shifting. Then he slowly sank into a chair, covered his face with his hands, and whispered, his voice shaking. Forgive me. Forgive me for Michael. It wasn't a formal apology. It was real remorse. I didn't know about Michael, or the others, he said, looking into her eyes. When I made those decisions, I only thought about numbers, profit, efficiency. I saw Excel spreadsheets, graphs, not the people behind them. I never thought about the families, the children, the mortgages, the dreams. They were just lines in a report to be reduced. Laura stared at him in disbelief. She had expected excuses, the usual, it's just business. Instead, she saw a man genuinely shaken. David stood up. I can't bring Michael back. I can't erase the past. But if I survive this night, I can try to be better. I owe that much to the people I've hurt. Laura nodded and sat back down. They're still looking for you. They know your penthouse, your office, everywhere you go. You need to disappear until things calm down. I have a house in Key West, David said after a moment's thought. Old place, from my grandmother. I hardly ever go there. Maybe they don't know about it. Leave tonight, Laura insisted. No driver, no luxury car, no calls. Don't tell anyone. Not even Kelly. Not even her? His voice trembled. She's losing her mind with worry. Especially her, Laura said firmly. If you tell her, you'll put her in danger. They could use her to get to you. David closed his eyes and nodded. All right? That same night, he rented an ordinary gray Toyota, took cash, turned off his phone's location tracking, and drove toward Key West. He spent 3 weeks in the old family house there, buying groceries from a small local store, cooking, cleaning, heating the place himself. For the first time in years, he lived like an ordinary man, and he didn't hate it. The silence gave him space to think about life, his choices, and the people he had hurt. Michael Adams stopped being just a name on a spreadsheet. He became a person, with a sister, a family, a story. And David realized how many others like him there must have been along his path. Kelly called every day. At first, he stayed silent. Later, he texted her, urgent business trip. I'm fine. She worried, then got angry. Her parents were furious. How could he have disappeared in the middle of dinner? Laura called with updates. The attackers were being hunted, some had been arrested, others had vanished. Their conversations turned from updates to life itself, regrets, memories. She told him about Michael, his dreams, the man he had been. Each story struck David like a blow. One day, he found out what had happened to the others from that same company. Besides Michael, 3 more were dead, 2 had taken their own lives, 1 had died of a heart attack. The rest were struggling in poverty. He had never known, or perhaps had chosen not to. David called Laura. I want to start a foundation. I'll put in $1 million, maybe more. It'll help those people, medical care, education, whatever they need. And I'll change my system, no more ruthless layoffs. Words mean nothing without action, she said. I know, he replied. I'll prove it. But I need your help. You know these people. You can make sure the aid reaches them. Laura hesitated. If this is for publicity, I'll expose you. It's not. I promise. A month later, David returned to Miami. All the attackers had either been caught or fled abroad. The police closed the case. The danger was over. But he knew he could never return to the life he'd lived before. Something inside him had changed forever. The first thing he did was meet Kelly. She was waiting for him in the penthouse, angry, confused, but still waiting. When she saw him at the door, she ran to him, hugged him, then hit him in the chest with her fist, tears streaming down her face. How could you just disappear like that without a word? I thought you were dead. I thought you left me. A month, David. A whole month of silence. He sat her down on the couch, took her hands in his, and told her everything, about the armed men in the restaurant, about Laura, the waitress who had saved his life, about her brother Michael who had taken his own life after being fired, about the escape, the hiding, and what he had come to understand about himself, his choices, and the cost of his ambition. Kelly listened without interrupting. Her face changed, from anger to shock, from shock to understanding. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long time before asking softly, "And now? What are you going to do about it?" David told her about the foundation he planned to create, about the $1 million he would invest, about helping the families of those who had been laid off, about changing the way he ran his business. No more ruthless decisions for profit, no more layoffs without social support programs. Kelly studied him intently, as if seeing him for the first time. Then she nodded slowly. "You know," she said quietly, "I'm proud of you. The man who walked out of that restaurant a month ago and the one sitting in front of me now, they're 2 completely different people. And I love the new one even more." David felt a weight lift from his chest. But Kelly added carefully, "There's just one problem. A big one." "What is it?" he asked, tense. "My parents. Oliver and Marilyn. They won't understand. They won't accept this." And she was right. When David visited the Graves family a few days later, the atmosphere was glacial. Oliver met him standing, not even offering a seat. Marilyn looked at him with thinly veiled contempt. "A charity foundation?" Oliver almost spat the words. $1 million for a bunch of failures who couldn't find new jobs? That's insanity, Simmons. A complete waste of money and reputation. It's not a waste, David replied calmly. It's responsibility. These people suffered because of my decisions. Because of sound business decisions. Oliver snapped. You optimized the company, you improved efficiency, that's normal practice. If every successful businessman started handing out money to everyone he fired, the market would collapse. Marilyn intervened coldly. And this new business philosophy, no harsh decisions, social responsibility. David, that's weakness. In our world, the weak get eaten. Investors will turn their backs on you. Some already have, David admitted. But others have joined, people who care about more than profit. Oliver gave a humorless laugh. Naive. Childish. Listen, Simmons, if you keep going down this path, playing the noble knight, throwing money around, building a business on humanity, you will not have my blessing to marry Kelly. I will not let my daughter marry a man who ruins himself over a misplaced sense of guilt. Kelly, sitting beside him, turned pale. But when she spoke, her voice was firm. Dad, I don't need your permission. I'm an adult. I make my own choices about who I marry. And I will marry David. Oliver's face flushed with anger. Then I'll cut you off. Do you understand what that means? Millions of dollars, connections, social standing, all gone. Marilyn backed him up in an icy tone. Kelly, think this through. We cannot have a son-in-law who looks weak and sentimental. It would damage the family's reputation. Our partners, our friends, everyone would see it as a surrender to failures. A heavy silence filled the room. David looked at Kelly, uncertain what she would choose. He understood the magnitude of her decision, to give up a massive inheritance, the influence of one of Miami's most powerful families, and a privileged life. This wasn't just a statement. It was a real sacrifice. Kelly stood slowly, looked at her parents, then at David. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice didn't shake. I love you, Mom and Dad. I always will. But my life is mine to decide, not yours. David has changed. He's become better, more honest, more human. And I'll stand by him, even if it costs me every cent of your fortune. Because some things in this world matter more than money or status. Oliver and Marilyn Graves stormed out of the room, seething with anger and wounded pride. The door slammed behind them so hard the windows rattled. Kelly remained standing in the middle of the living room, her body trembling from the emotional strain, but her gaze was steady, resolute. David approached her and took her hands. You didn't have to make that choice right now. You didn't have to choose me over your parents. I'll understand if you want to stay with them, keep your family. I won't hold it against you. Kelly shook her head, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. No, David. You're my family now. Real family isn't about the people who gave you life and money, it's the ones who accept you for who you are and support your choice to be better. Together, we'll build something worth more than everything my parents ever had, a life built on honesty, not calculation. They held each other in the empty apartment her parents had just left, taking with them their blessing, their fortune, and their connections. But for the first time in a long while, both felt they had made the right choice. A few months later, they got married. There was no lavish reception at the Golden Swan, no hundreds of guests in designer clothes, no orchestra or fireworks. They chose a small, cozy trattoria on the edge of the city, invited only their closest friends, the people who had truly supported them. Laura Adams sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. They were tears of mixed emotion, joy that something good had grown out of tragedy, and sorrow that her beloved brother Michael wasn't there to see it. To see how his death had not been in vain, but had sparked something meaningful. The foundation David created was already changing lives. He called it the Second Chance Foundation, in memory of Michael Adams and everyone who had suffered. Families who had lost everything after the layoffs were receiving real help, not handouts, but genuine support. The children of those people could continue their education. Others got funding for medical care, to pay debts, or start small businesses. It didn't erase the past or bring back the dead, but it helped the living believe life could go on. David met personally with every family. He came not in a designer suit or with bodyguards, but as a man, humble and human. He listened to their stories, looked them in the eye, admitted his mistakes openly and without excuses. At first, many didn't want to see him, the pain was too raw. But gradually, as they saw his sincerity, his real change, some began to forgive. Not all, forgiveness can't be demanded or bought. But those who did said that the weight of hatred had finally lifted. His investment company also changed dramatically. There were no more ruthless takeovers with mass layoffs. David adopted a partnership model where everyone benefited. Employees were no longer just rows in spreadsheets, faceless expense lines, each one had a name, a story, a family. Whenever he had to make a difficult decision, he asked himself one question: how will this affect someone's actual life? Profit still mattered, he wasn't a dreamer. Business was still business. But never again at the cost of humanity, never at the cost of destroying lives. Some investors did leave, calling him soft and impractical. In business circles, people whispered behind his back that Simmons had lost his edge, that he was done for, that he'd soon go bankrupt. But others came, investors drawn to a new, ethical, transparent way of doing business. And there turned out to be far more of them than he ever imagined. Kelly found her calling working at the Second Chance Foundation. Her London education, her social connections, her organizational talent, all of it now served something real. She managed fundraising, educational programs, partnerships with public institutions. Her parents, Oliver and Marilyn, tried several times to reconcile, but always on their own terms. They would come with demands: close that foundation, go back to real business, and we'll forgive you. Kelly refused each time, firmly but with heartbreak. "I'll welcome you back into my life," she would tell them calmly, "when you're ready to accept me and David as we are, without conditions, without trying to change what we believe in. Until then, I'm living my own life. That's my choice." Laura Adams became the director of the foundation. David insisted it had to be her. Who else could understand the needs of those affected better than someone who had lived through it herself? She monitored every dollar, making sure that the aid reached the right people directly, without middlemen, without corruption, without waste. Between her and David grew a rare kind of trust, one built not on profit or ambition, but on honesty, shared pain, and the mutual desire to make things right. She never let him forget who he had been and what path he had taken. She became his quiet but persistent conscience, a living reminder of how important it was to stay on the right path and never slip back into the cold, soulless world of numbers and profit. During the wedding reception, when guests had relaxed after the ceremony, David raised his glass. Not with Dom Perignon for $3,000, but with a simple local wine, honest and modest, and thanked everyone for coming to share their day. Then he said something that made the entire room fall silent. "I want to thank 3 people who aren't here tonight, the men who came to that restaurant a month ago with guns, intending to kill me." The hall went still. "I'm grateful to them," David continued firmly, "because if it hadn't been for that shock, if I hadn't been forced to run out of the Golden Swan in panic, if I hadn't had to hide and think, I probably would have gone on destroying people's lives blindly, without even noticing." His voice grew stronger. "I would have married Kelly for the wrong reasons, not because I loved her soul, but because she fit perfectly into my picture of success. I would have kept breaking lives in the name of numbers and efficiency, without even realizing it. I would have lived an empty, false life, hiding behind the glitter of wealth and the illusion of power." He looked around the tables. But sometimes a person needs to stand on the edge of death, to hear a bullet whistle past his head, to feel real fear, before he can understand what it truly means to live. I got a second chance, and I'm grateful for it every single day. David lifted his glass higher. "I'm grateful to Laura Adams, not just because she physically saved my life that night, but because she saved me morally, showing me the price of my own decisions. I'm grateful to my wife, Kelly, for choosing me, for turning away from her inheritance and her family's approval, for believing I could be better." His voice trembled with emotion. "And I'm grateful to Michael Adams, a man I never met in life, but whose tragic story taught me the most important lesson of all: every action has consequences. Behind every number in a financial report, there is a real human being, someone with a family, with dreams, fears, and hopes. And we are responsible for how our decisions shape their lives." He finished his wine and sat down to warm, genuine applause. Kelly hugged him, whispering softly in his ear, "Michael would be proud of you. Later that night, when the celebration was winding down, David and Kelly danced together in the cozy courtyard of the little restaurant. Soft music played, and simple string lights glowed gently above them instead of crystal chandeliers. "Do you ever regret how it all turned out?" Kelly asked quietly. "Don't you ever wish that night had gone perfectly? The proposal at the Golden Swan, the $50,000 ring, the $3,000 champagne, my parents' approval." David drew her closer, holding her tightly. "No, Kelly. Not for a second. Because that difficult, painful path led me here, to my real self. Not the mask of a successful businessman, but a living person. To a life we're building together, one based on real values, not appearances or expectations." Kelly smiled and said softly, "You know, I should tell you something. That night, when you stood up and said you were going to the restroom, I saw those three men in black. I saw Laura lean in and whisper something to you. And I knew, something serious was happening. I wanted to run after you, to stop you, but something inside told me I needed to trust you, to let you handle it. I believed you'd come back. And I was right." David stopped, surprised. "You knew? From the very beginning?" "Not the details," she said. "But I felt it. And I chose to trust you." "You were much braver and wiser than I ever imagined," he said, his voice full of admiration. "I learned from the best," Kelly laughed softly. They continued to dance slowly, surrounded by the warm light of simple string bulbs and the genuine smiles of people who truly cared about them. Two people who had walked through chaos, fear, and pain, but had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over appearances, were building a new life, a life that finally had meaning. In one corner of the courtyard, Laura stood watching them through tears, tears of joy and sorrow intertwined. She thought of Michael, how happy he would have been to see this. His death, so cruel and senseless, still hurt, the wound would never fully heal. But out of that darkness, out of that unbearable grief, something good had grown. She realized a simple but profound truth: even from the worst tragedy, light can be born, if people are willing to change. Human beings truly can become better. And sometimes, by saving another person, you end up saving yourself from the kind of hatred that can destroy you. Sometimes life forces us to stand before a mirror in the harshest, most unforgiving way, showing us without mercy who we've become, what we've done, and how many people we've hurt along the way. And at that critical moment, each of us faces a choice: to turn away from the truth, close our eyes, and keep walking the same path while justifying ourselves, or to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful, and change. David Simmons chose the second. He chose to look in the mirror. And when he did, he realized something simple: the life he had chased so relentlessly, the penthouse in Brickell, the Porsche in the garage, the $50,000 watch, the $380 million in the bank, was, at its core, empty and meaningless. The life he began to build after that night at the Golden Swan, one filled with hard work, remorse, the pain of admitting mistakes, and genuine humanity, turned out to be truly rich and fulfilling. Because in the end, it's not money that makes life meaningful and full. It's the people you love sincerely. The values you're willing to fight and sacrifice for. And the peace of mind that comes when you lie down at night knowing that today, you did everything you could to leave this world a little better than it was, that your presence in it meant something. That is true wealth. And David finally understood it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the value of human life and how our decisions shape the lives of others, click the super thanks button. It's the small heart with a $sign under the video. Every time you do, you help us keep creating stories that inspire, that remind us of the importance of dignity, compassion, and the power of a second chance. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this journey. Tell us in the comments which moment moved you the most. Was it Laura's warning in the restaurant? Kelly's choice between her parents and love? Or David's transformation itself? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss new stories about people who found the strength to change. And leave a like if you believe that every one of us deserves a second chance, and that it's never too late to become better. Before you go, make sure to watch the story we've left for you on the screen. We're sure it will make you think about what truly matters in life.